to know is that our main goal with this is not just to give you information, or anytime we're talking to young people, we don't want to just give people the information and leave them with that. Um, we know at the end of the day, the things that we say are not necessarily going to immediately alter their behaviors or anything, but we want to try and equip them with harm reduction strategies and harm reduction resources, so that they're able to engage with any form of gambling, whether sports betting or otherwise, in a safe and healthy manner. So, um, yeah, that's all I got to say. And just going to repeat myself as well for those of you who might have been joining late. If you do have any questions or comments while we are presenting today, feel free to put them in the chat, and my coworker Erin will she'll be keeping an eye on that, and she'll interrupt me when there's something to be said. So, but first things first, we're going to have a little bit of fun here. Um, we are going to be we'll be doing something we call the YGAP World Cup activity. And everyone in this meeting today, here for this presentation today, is going to they're going to get a couple things. So I'm going to go to the next slide. I'll give you a little bit more information here. So everyone is going to be given 10 imaginary YGAP dollars, and I apologize, they are not worth actual money. I wish they were. We would all be so rich if that were the case. But everyone's going to get 10 YGAP dollars. You're going to choose which of these 5 teams you think is going to be winning the World Cup. And you're also going to be allowed to decide how much you would like to bet on that team. And then finally, Aaron is going to launch a poll to whittle down who's betting for which teams, and just to kind of keep track as well. Once again, there will be no money actually won from this, but it's just a little fun thing we like to start with. So I'll let you look at the stats for a moment longer. You can see we have 5 teams today. There's Brazil, Croatia, Argentina, Uruguay, and France. And for those of you who may be soccer or football fans, as it may be, maybe you can glean a little bit more information from these statistics we have on the screen today. But with that in mind, you get to choose 2 things, and Aaron's going to pop up the first poll. You get to choose, like I mentioned, which team you think is going to win, and I'll give you guys a moment to all vote on that. And I'm already seeing those votes coming in. Wow, okay. Yeah, it's amazing when you have when you have so many people for a webinar, how quickly the numbers shift, and you know, how quickly these answers get in. So I'm seeing a lot of responses. All right. Looks like the responses have slowed down. So Aaron, if you want to end the
Oh,
poll.
there's just like a couple more people coming in.
Oh, yeah, no worries.
But I think with that's 83 out of 89 people have voted. So I'm going to end the poll now and share the results. Wow. Are we able to see that? That's a lot of votes.
Yeah, it looks like the vast majority of people voted for Argentina. I imagine that at least somewhere in our in the crowd today, someone is a Lionel Messi fan. I'm sure that might have influenced your results as well. But we have Argentina, followed by France, followed by Brazil, followed by Croatia, and finally we had 3 little votes for Uruguay. So, and now Aaron's going to put up a second vote, or a second poll rather, where you guys will get to decide how much money you want to bet on the team you
Sorry.
chose. Yep, no worries, Aaron. So, yeah, so we won't be able to keep
I
track
think
of
with
every
so many
individual.
people, my computer's going slow.
Oh, that's a shame. There it is. All right. So go ahead and decide how much of those 10 YGAP dollars you would like to bet on your team. For those of you that might be very confident, you might decide to bet more. For those who are not so sure, you don't have to bet if you don't want to, but you have your 4 options on the screen now.
And sorry, Adam, I'm just jumping in here. I see that some people are having a problem getting signed in. They keep getting booted out. So we do apologize, and I hope that that does correct itself. Please let us know if you keep having issues. And also, if you have a hand up, if there's something you want to put in the chat or put in the Q&A, please do so, and then we can address your question. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you, Yvette.
So I know 83 people voted, so we just have 2 more people to tell us how much they're putting down on these bets. Give it maybe a few more seconds. We're at 82. And I think I'm gonna, there we go, 83. So I'm gonna end the poll here.
All right.
We're gonna share the results.
And voila,
So
sorry, go ahead, Erin. Go ahead.
I was just gonna say 7% decided not to spend any of their money at all, which is really interesting.
Yeah.
And 36% spent $7.
All right. Or $4 to $7, right? It might have been 5 or 6 as well.
4 to 7, yep.
Yeah. Yeah, so it's really interesting whenever we do this presentation. It seems like that tends to be the most popular answer as well, but it is interesting to see as well that a large percentage of you, right, approximately a quarter of you guys, put all of your money in, or close to all of your money in. So maybe if we had, an option for every dollar, it would have looked different, but we are a little bit limited by the nature of Zoom and the presentation. But let's move on. We've wasted enough time. So if you decided to bet on Brazil, I know I believe that was the second most popular choice. I regret to inform you that unfortunately, Brazil did not make it. They were eliminated in the quarterfinals, leaving only the other 4 teams. So those of you who bet on Brazil, unfortunately, we get to keep all of your YGAP dollars, and you have nothing to show for it today. Sorry to say. Now, here are the final 2 matches we have. So we have France and Uruguay that are facing off against each other, and followed by Argentina and Croatia. And so first, we have our game between France and Uruguay, and the winner of that match in an upset actually happens to be Uruguay. And if you bet on France, which was the majority here, or sorry, not the majority, that was, I believe, was second or third, you once again will not win anything from this. In the Argentina and Croatia match, things went a little bit more as expected, and so those of you who voted for Argentina, congratulations, you guys get to your team has moved on to the next round, and your bets will still be in play. But for those of you who voted Croatia, unfortunately, you have lost. I'm sorry to say. Which leads us to the YGAP World Cup final. Now, I would like to say that this whole activity is imaginary. For those of you who do follow the FIFA World Cup, we know that this is not what the result was a couple months ago. But in this case, Uruguay seemed to absolutely steamroll the competition because Uruguay is our winner for the World Cup activity. So those of you who voted on Argentina, thank you for playing. Unfortunately, Messi did not seem to be on top of his game, and Uruguay happened to come out on top. So thank you all for playing. Thank you all for casting your votes. And we have a couple little follow-up questions as well. I also would like to say real quick before I move on to the 3 of you guys who voted Uruguay, well done. I'm sure you are probably very excited and very happy with yourself right now. But first question we want to put forth is, how did you decide how much you wanted to bet? And this is something I'm sure we'll have plenty of responses in the chat, but I'd encourage you to type. It doesn't have to be anything incredibly long. It could be just a sentence or two. But try to we'd love to hear from you to find out how you decided how much you would like to bet. Or even if there was anything that influenced your decisions to bet. We'll talk about that in a moment as well.
Okay, so a lot of answers came in quickly. One person said that they just bet it all. They just bet it all. Nothing really went into deciding how much. Another person said they're not really a bettor, so they bet 0. I'm definitely not going to be able to read all of these because it's going so fast. Ross said, I was fairly confident in my decision, but didn't want to use all of my money. So I went high, but not all the way.
Okay.
Another person said their confidence in soccer knowledge and balancing their risks is how they decided.
Okay.
And another person said they just picked random. They're French, so they went in with the French. Lots of different reasons and lots of different ways we decided to balance our money in this case.
Very good. Very good. Très bien for the person who voted for France. That would have been my choice as well. But okay, so good answers. Now I have another little question for you guys here, and it's, how did the stats impact your decision making? And I know we had one answer that kind of alluded to that already, but if this is something that did or didn't, we'd love once again for you guys to put it in the chat. We have 2 more questions as well, so just letting you know not to get off your keyboards yet.
Okay, wow, coming in really fast. Everybody has the same typing speed, I can see.
I can see the chat number increasing in increments. It's kind of amusing on my end.
stats had a lot of impact for Caitlin, picked the second best. Somebody else named Trent bet entirely based on stats as they have no soccer knowledge of their own. And then is it Dana or Dena said they didn't actually understand the stats, so they just did their best to pick. They did their best.
All right.
And other people are saying it affected them a little. Some are saying not at all. So yeah, it varies quite a bit.
Yeah, awesome. All right, our third question today, and we'll touch about this a little bit, or touch on this a little bit more later as well. But in sports betting, what are some of the things that you can and can't control? What are things you are able to and not able to control? And once again, yeah, you can put your answers in
Player
chat.
injury,
Mm.
the outcome of the game, the match. Whoa, so fast. There we go. You can control your bets, but you can't control the performance, the mindset, perhaps of the players. Legal scandals causing best players to get fired. Okay, Ashley. Um, there's lots of different things. Wow. There's so many different things on here. Player injuries, results.
Probably more
can't
than
even.
the whole team could ever put together at once, right?
Yeah, exactly. So many different things. Great answers,
Awesome.
though. Oh,
Yeah,
expectations is one of them too. Interesting. And
yeah,
bad bounces.
excellent
That's a funny
answers.
one.
Awesome. All right, and one last question for you guys. Do you think that the outcome of a sports bet is skill based or chance based? And this is kind of gonna lead into our main discussion today. Once again,
Okay.
yeah, I'm already seeing some answers come in, so I'll
We're
stop.
Yes, it's both chance. I don't see anybody saying that it's like just skill, but we seem to say that it's either half and half, a bit of both, and some people are saying entirely chance. There's one person who said as it flew by that it is an educated decision. Um,
Okay.
and we'll definitely talk about that more. And it says it's only a skill for the people who actually play. So not necessarily the people betting, but the people who are actually playing soccer.
Okay. Okay. Very good answers. Awesome. All right. It's fun to ask these questions too, kind of to gauge where people are at. But thank you to all of you guys who are putting forth discussion points and stuff like that. It makes our job a lot easier as well. So we're going to move on, and there's one thing we want to highlight first before we really decide whether sports betting um, really fits the definition of gambling. I'm sure many of us here would agree that, absolutely it does, but we're going to talk about why just for a brief moment. And so in YGAP, the definition that we use for gambling is that it's when you're risking something of value and you don't know if you'll win or lose. And so if you'll excuse me for a second there. So oftentimes when we think of gambling, it typically involves money and we're betting it on some kind of random outcome, whether it's the spin of a roulette wheel or whether it's the outcome of a sports game. Um, but it's also one thing that we really like to clarify as well. It doesn't even just have to be something like money. It doesn't have to be something expensive like your car or a mortgage, but it can be something as simple and inexpensive as a Rubik's Cube. This is something I do as a hobby, and yet some of my cubes are more valuable than some of the more expensive items I have in my house. Um, or at least valuable to me, I should say. Not that they're that expensive. But anyway, so you're risking something of value. Chance is a primary aspect of it. And then the final thing that's not really mentioned as much in the definition, but the third thing is that there is some kind of prize involved. And so when we look at the definition for sports betting, it says that it's an activity about predicting the sports result and placing a bet on the outcome. And so just kind of thinking to ourselves, do we have those three aspects, those three pieces of the definition there? Absolutely. Typically, you're betting money through a sports book or betting with your friends, possibly. And when you're not in control of the game, that means it is a form of chance. And finally, you're going to be winning or losing something out of the outcome. But we'll go a little bit more into detail with that today. I do see that there is a raised hand, and I don't know if we have audio permissions for attendance today. Um, oh, and the hand went down. So I don't know if that was a mistake, but I just wanted to make sure that if somebody had something they wanted to say, they've got the opportunity to. So if you do still have questions or comments, as we said before, feel free to put them in the chat. But anyway, let's continue moving. So we're gonna do a couple Q&A polls as well, some true and false things, some multiple choice. We're gonna talk about the illusion of control when it comes to sports betting. And so the first one, starting off a little bit straightforward, is in sports betting, there is nothing out of our control. Aaron's gonna put up a poll with your options on screen in just a moment, but we'd love for you guys to take a stab and tell us whether or not it is true or false. And based off of the people we have here today, I'm going to take a wild guess and say most people are going to guess properly on this one. Or correctly, I should say.
We do still have a lot of answers coming in. And we're getting mostly one, but a bit of the other answer as well. We still have a few coming in, but we're starting to slow down. So I think I'm going to end it here and show the results. So we had
some of it is our coworkers trying to mess with us today. So.
I wonder. We had a small percentage, 8% of people said it was true. 92% said that it was false.
All right. And to all of you who said false, congratulations. You are absolutely correct. It is false. And as I mentioned briefly on the previous slide, anytime there's an element of chance, we really can't guarantee the outcome is the way we want it. Even if sports betting or any kind of activity was 99% skill and 1% of it was luck, it's out of our control. It still means that fundamentally it comes down to luck. Now, in sports betting, we talked about some of those factors that are out of our control, and a lot of them you guys probably mentioned. I'm sure there are a ton of messages in the chat as well that we missed that we could add to this list, but there are a lot of factors that are out of our control. I like, for example, the one person who said that if the players themselves are betting and it gets them kicked out of the league. You might be a Raptors fan if you were the one who said that, but yeah, absolutely, that is something that can happen, and that's absolutely out of our control. Now, a follow-up question. Somebody as well mentioned this aspect that maybe if you have the knowledge, it gives you an edge. So what percentage of people participating in sports believe that their sports knowledge actually gives them an edge when predicting the outcome? So once again, you have 4 options, and the poll is up on screen. This one might not be as obvious here.
So right now we have we have more people have joined us as well. So now we have a pool of 101 people answering.
Excellent.
We're just over halfway right now with the answers, but they're coming in quite fast. And I'm just going to read a comment quickly while we have the time. So sports is probably very effective to convince people that they can win by skill by reading stats. But the stats don't decide what happens the day of the game. And that's a really good comment and very true as well.
Yeah, absolutely. It makes me think in my own experience, I grew up watching hockey. I mean, I still watch hockey, but there would be so many times where a team would finish in the top of the standings, and you'd expect, based on how they did, that they'd absolutely sweep and dominate in the playoffs. And yet multiple times they would be eliminated in the first or second round. So absolutely, there are so many other factors to consider. Aaron, I see you've ended the poll.
Yep. Yeah, it stopped around 79, so I thought I would share the results. And we're seeing some really close answers here with 70%. 43% of our audience chose 70%, which I believe was C, and then 41% of our audience chose D, which was sitting around 90%.
All right. It's kind of funny that you mentioned that because the correct answer, according to a recent survey, is it's 70% of people. But for the people that regularly bet on sports, that number actually does jump up to 90%. So I think that's very interesting that the more that somebody engages in sports betting, the more it kind of warps their perception of how much their sports knowledge might actually give them that edge. And while it's not necessarily a harmful thing to believe, like there admittedly in some games like poker and even in a way sports betting, having knowledge of the game might feel like it allows you to understand how the game will function more. But realistically, when people are overconfident and they believe that their own knowledge can really influence how effective or accurate they are when they're betting, it can really lead to more impulsive decision making, and it can actually increase the risk of somebody developing a gambling problem. So, once again, not necessarily or inherently a risk, but it is a possibility. All right, we've got our next question up here today. And it's pretty straightforward. Do we think that more sports betting knowledge results in more money earned through sports betting? So Aaron should have that pull up in just a moment. There we go. We'll give it about 30 seconds, I'd say, and then we can continue to move because we do want to be conscious of the time as well. I will say as well, while people are answering, I don't want to say this to influence you, but I remember when I heard the answer to this, it genuinely surprised me, in that I
Well,
thought
these
that,
come in again.
yeah, go ahead. Go ahead, Aaron.
Because we're sitting around half right now. I saw another comment by Ashley who said that a lot of these new sports betting apps even advertise you don't even need to know about sports because we'll tell you the odds. I gave a little bit of
Interesting.
an answer there, which is, yeah, that's true. They'll calculate it for you, but most of these apps and platforms are calculating it differently. So they're not all the same, and which has opened up the market to third-party websites that will compare all of these different odds, almost like a betting Trivago, if you will, and then recommend what participants can choose. And here are the results, by the way.
Perfect.
And I stopped sharing that way too fast. I'm so sorry.
It's all good. And while those results are up, I'm just going to show the answers here. And absolutely, the answer is false. Well done for those of you who guessed correctly. But it's actually been found through research in recent studies in the past 5 to 6 years, that the level of expertise that somebody has does not necessarily increase the amount of money they make, but it might allow them to have a higher accuracy rate. Now, before I move on, you might hear that and think, well, if someone's more accurate, then doesn't it mean that they're going to be making more money overall? And the reality is that, well, it would seem that way. It typically means that they're also going to be betting more frequently. And while they might have a higher accuracy rate, they're also going to be losing money at an increased rate as well. Like, they might be, if they're betting more money overall, while they might be technically more accurate, they're going to be losing just as much money when they're not accurate. So it does have, it doesn't necessarily mean that you earn more money. It just means that you might be a little bit more accurate in the long run. I hope that makes sense. But I'm going to keep moving. If my computer would cooperate with me, I apologize. There we go. Okay. So there are some contributing factors when people do engage with sports betting to developing a gambling problem that aren't necessarily present in all other types of gambling. And just for the sake of time, you're welcome to put other answers in chat, but I'm going to move forward with the four main ones that we discuss in our presentation. And so the first thing is that those who participate in sports betting, according to the data, they typically have a higher level of education than those who might engage in other forms of gambling. When people are more educated or when they're more tech savvy, it can kind of lead to this belief that statistics and that just innate game knowledge might provide them with that advantage. And it can lead to people, unfortunately, overestimating their personal ability to win or delusion. It gives them a delusion of expertise, as it says on the slide. So it's really this belief that somebody might be better at something than they are, and that leads to greater levels of loss and greater levels of engagement, and also greater chances of developing that gambling addiction that can be so harmful for people. Aaron, do we have any comments or questions at the moment, or am I good to keep going?
Well, we did get a comment from Christina. They said that they think that people are more likely not to understand that it isn't a skill when they relate heavily to athletes, and they see themselves in the athlete's shoes. It makes them think they're affecting the game. So, like, not necessarily the research aspect, but just being like, I play soccer, I like soccer, I understand what it's like, and thinking that that gives them an edge as well.
Yeah,
And that's not really a skill.
that's a really good point, both of you guys. That yeah, I never even thought of that, honestly. But Aaron, you're absolutely right when you say it's not a skill. It's just a belief.
We also just had a question come in from Andrew. They were asking if there's gender-based data on sports betting.
So do you want to answer that, Aaron? You can go ahead.
You got this one.
Okay. We actually when we did a run through of this earlier this week, we actually talked about this exact question, which I think is amusing. But absolutely, there is a lot of data that I'll say it this way, that suggests that there are gender differences. A lot of data says that most people that engage with sports betting are primarily male, and I believe it was under the age of 35, but that might not be correct. But in that kind of like 25 to 40-ish age range. Um, but that's not something we're going to be talking about as much today because while that may be what the vast majority of people identify as when they engage in gambling, it doesn't mean that the opposite can't be true. It doesn't mean that I don't want to be insulting here or play too much on stereotypes, but it doesn't mean that 70-year-old Ethel can't develop a problem with sports betting as well, right? Like anyone can have a problem with gambling, and so we try to remain impartial to gender and age when we share these statistics. I hope that answers that question. I think once again, for the sake of time, I am going to keep moving. And if you have any questions, if we have time at the end, we're happy to answer those as well. All right. So next, we're going to talk a little bit about the specifics of online sports betting and some of the changes that have happened recently, at least here in Ontario, and why online sports betting has become so much more popular in recent years when compared to before. So the first thing that changed, and probably the biggest thing that changed, is the fact that sports betting moved from parlay bets here in Ontario to single event sports bets. And if you're not familiar with those terms, a single event bet is when you bet on just one specific outcome in the game. That could be something like, once again, I'm a hockey guy, so I'm going to talk hockey. That would be something like Connor McDavid is going to score a goal in the Stanley Cup playoffs. Or if you're more into basketball, it could be something like LeBron James is going to score X amount of points and have X amount of rebounds, right? Those are single event bets, or actually you could bet on those both individually. Um, it also leads to, at least here in Ontario, we've allowed in-play betting as well, which means that you are able to make bets on the outcome of something happening while the game is in progress. You don't have to do it just before, you can do it in the middle of the game. So it could be the end of the second period, and then you could put in your bet to say Connor McDavid is going to score a goal in the third period. And then finally, these bets are also available online, where this was not the case before. With parlay betting, you were required to make at least two or more bets to make a wager at all. Some sources also say that it was three or more bets, but we've had a little bit of conflicting information on this, and I know I didn't have personal experience with sports betting prior to the changes, so it could be two or three bets, but the point is you had to make multiple bets at once, and in order to win anything from them, all of your picks had to be correct. You couldn't just put, Connor McDavid scores a goal and the Edmonton Oilers get a shutout. And if one of those happens, you win. Both of them have to be true. Otherwise, you win no money whatsoever. And that's kind of the higher risk of parlay betting. And a lot of parlay betting was only available in person. So you might be able to see that there are some pretty significant differences between the two. And that kind of leads to the question, so what are the potential risks of single play and online sports betting? And one of the first things we really highlight is that the fact that it's 24/7, it's accessible all the time, 24/7. It can lead to this increased frequency or increases to the amount of money that is being bet. And both of these are pretty significant risk factors when it comes to developing a gambling problem. And one of the other issues as well is that people can, kind of tied to that amount wagered, it can lead to things like overspending. I don't know if any of you have experienced this before, but I know, at least in my personal experience, whenever you're spending money online, it's a lot easier for it to feel as though it's not actually your money, or it might not have the same weight or value to you, specifically when you're spending online, especially when it's compared to physical cash. This is something we talk about in length in one of our other presentations, where we talk about microtransactions, excuse me, in video games, where it's so much easier to just put 99 cents out a couple times, but the reality is you'll end up spending far more money than you intended to, and very quickly, because of the ease with which you can spend. Now, Online sports betting has also been associated with a 5 times higher rate of problem gambling when compared to in-person forms of gambling only. And so, just as an example, if I'm remembering the statistics correct, and people are welcome to correct me on this, but at least here in Canada or in Ontario, the rate of problem gambling among traditional gamblers is around, I believe it's 1 to 2 or like 1.5 or 2% of people. Which means that in a room of 100 people, in theory, only 1 or 2 of those people might have a gambling addiction. If we took that same idea and applied it to specifically online sports betting, if you had a room full of 100 online sports bettors, that means you're going to more likely have closer to, 7, 8, or 9 or 10 people in that room. So it might not seem like it's that high of a rate, but it is still significantly more, quite significantly more than traditional forms of gambling. Now, another kind of alarming statistic with this is that people who place in-play bets are actually 3 times as likely to experience gambling problems, even beyond just what people who sports bet um, experience. And so, um, you're welcome. I mean, we have that why question on there, and I have the answers, but just seeing as where we are, I think we have a minute. If people have any potential explanations for this, or if they'd like to share something, um, why we think in-play bets are that much more harmful, you are welcome to put that in the chat. So I'll give it a couple seconds. I know typing takes time. And Aaron, if we don't see anything in the next 15 seconds or so, I'll keep moving.
We do have a response from Kyle. So the rate of placing bets can be only seconds between each bet you make. Whoa, where'd it go? Oh, and it's going fast. Adrenaline, reduced inhibition, instant gratification, the false sense of confidence, getting caught up in the moment. There's more excitement when it's in game. And this kind of structure encourages impulsivity.
Yeah. Yeah, all fantastic answers. Really kind of
Oh,
doing my job for me right now. Go ahead, Aaron. Sorry.
sorry. I was also going to say, because Kyle's comment disappeared, I tried to look for it again because I couldn't read the whole thing. But he said that it's a lot like slot machines, the way that it's structured, because it could only be seconds. It could be seconds between, can be only seconds between events like a slot machine. So yeah, with the amount of bets that you can make and how specific they can get, it can take such little time between your bet and the results.
Yeah.
There's also no clear like stopping point during the gameplay, and Larry said that it could lead to chasing losses. And
Yeah.
Megan also said a dopamine rush. So
All
lots
right.
of great answers.
Yeah, lots of great. Honestly, you guys could probably look in the chat and have just as great a time with this workshop compared to listening to us. So, no, I kid. But thank you all for the great answers. Absolutely, the couple things that we try to highlight on the slide are things like the short duration and the fact that fast repetitive betting absolutely influences this risk for problem gambling. That last, I believe it was Larry, you said, the last comment you said, whoever said chasing losses. Um, yeah, absolutely. That's a huge thing. If you bet on things in the first period and they don't happen, boom, you can make bets in the second and third period to try and win that money back. And that's such a very, very slippery slope. It's so easy for that to become problematic very quickly, as I'm sure many of you know. All right, so got another quick poll that we're going to put up, and in order to try and combat these the increased likelihood of developing a gambling problem, do we think that setting time limits or money limits is a more effective way of reducing these potential negatives?
So we have a lot of results coming in, and we are getting results for both. And honestly, both money limits and time limits is something that's heavily pushed in terms of harm reductions for gambling, but doesn't work specifically for in-game betting. I don't know. So we're around 70 people responding, and they're still coming in quite fast. So I think we'll give it a few more seconds. And I'm also just going to acknowledge that Rochelle also, a few seconds after Larry commented, said more specifically chasing losses, because what you said, Adam, where you can lose your first bet and then try to maximize that after to
Yeah.
win more later, which,
Yeah. That's a good
statistically,
point. And then there's also the challenge, we don't even touch on this in this presentation, but the challenge of like cashing out early, and do you stay in and try to win big, or do you
yeah.
cash it early and just take what you've won so far? Like that's a whole other conversation. We're not going to be talking
Yeah.
about that today, unfortunately.
No,
But
but it's like a big one
yeah,
because a lot of people think when they're cashing out early that they're still winning, even though they've still lost money. It's a weird one.
yeah.
So we're sitting around 80% of people responded. And we can see that 79% of those who responded said that money limits were the more effective option here.
Yeah. And congratulations, because you got it right. Um, yeah, so money limits typically are more effective because if if you set a limit that you're only going to spend $100 in total over the course of a whole game, then you can make a bunch of little micro bets, but you're still only spending $100. If you say you're only going to bet before the game, it doesn't set those same restrictions on you. You could make 100 different bets in the time that you have before the game, or even if you're only going to bet during the first period or the third period, you can still make a whole lot of bets and spend more money than if you had set a money limit. So recent studies, as recent as this year, have actually stated that it definitely is more effective to set money limits rather than time limits.
I had a question come in from Megan, who I believe is in the UK. So in the UK, we have gambling operators, sponsoring big sports teams, etc. Does that happen in Canada too? So as an example, will Bet365 sponsor a football team, so it's constantly in your face, and you're seeing it, and young people are seeing it.
Yeah,
Um,
you can take this one, Erin. Go ahead.
I was gonna say in like big teams, you might not see it as much because it's frowned upon, but they definitely sponsor the corporations who broadcast it. So they might partner up with Rogers as an example. So the Rogers Center here in downtown Toronto, our baseball team, the Blue Jays, Rogers has been sponsored by some betting operators as well. Caitlin also said that she believes the NHL team has a gambling logo in front of their jersey this year. So yeah,
That's
we're
right.
definitely seeing those relationships happen here in Canada as well.
Yeah,
And you're right, it does expose youth because like sporting events are usually for families, right? Not just the adults. So kids are there too, seeing it. As well in the US, DraftKings is big in UFC.
that is true.
Interesting.
Yeah. Even here in Canada, those of you who are especially from Ontario, I'm sure you'll be familiar with this. But while corporations or organizations, they might not sponsor the teams directly, there
Hmm.
was a bit of a debacle where a number of well-known hockey players were used in sponsorships by these companies. So we'll see one of them later, but one of the greatest hockey players of all time, Wayne Gretzky, partnered up with BetMGM, I believe it was. I know Connor McDavid, who I've mentioned a couple times, who's currently one of the best players, and another really good player named Austin Matthews, who plays for the Toronto Maple Leafs. Both of them were directly sponsored by those companies as well. And so even though it's not necessarily on their logos, you're still seeing the advertisements all around the arenas, even in basketball, even I imagine somewhat in American football as well. I'm not a huge American football fan. I apologize. Um, but you do still see it. It's just not directly on the jerseys because that's frowned upon. But you'll still see it in commercials, and you'll still see people from sports, you know, being used in advertisements. So it's very interesting. Um, all right, we're gonna take a little bit of a detour here, and we're gonna talk about something that people may or may not have experience with, but we're gonna talk about fantasy sports. Um, I know for myself, this is something I did for a number of years, actually, not for money, but just for fun with my friends. But just to clarify a couple little things here. First of all, there are two two main distinct categories for fantasy sports. And I know that there are a lot of subcategories with this. We could probably make a whole presentation just on the ins and outs of fantasy sports, but that's not what we're here to talk about today. But a typical fantasy sport league will usually last over the course of the season, or it might be even longer if it's something called a keeper league. And these typically involve just a single buy-in, where you pay to join the league, and then by the end of the season, if you end up winning the entire pool, then you'll get a cash prize. And it's typically just over the long term. Maybe you're fighting to make good choices from week to week, but those choices don't necessarily gain you money immediately. Whereas daily fantasy sports, and once again, we can have a whole presentation on just this as well, but um, most standard forms of daily fantasy sports are an accelerated form of fantasy where it's just over the course of a week or over the course of a day. And you're basically trying to optimize and um, you know uh, end up with the best possible results each week so that you can make money off of it each week. There would be like there's a new buy-in every week. In a way, you could almost think of it as fantasy sports leagues are almost like the parlay betting of fantasy sports, and then daily fantasy sports are almost like the in-play betting of fantasy sports. In that it's much faster and involves a lot more smaller transactions. And so we want to put forth the questions, both of them at the same time. Do we think that daily fantasy sports, specifically, do we think that's a form of chance or skill? And therefore, do we think it is also a form of gambling? And so we don't have a poll for this, but if anybody has any specific opinions, or if you have any questions about the topic in general, you're also welcome to put them in the chat before we move on to our next couple slides.
So Andrew had a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
I think I might need just a little bit of clarification on it. So Andrew said maybe we can include video games such as Football Manager, and I'm wondering, like, include video games like that as a DFS? I'm not familiar with that game. I don't know if you are, Adam, but I would say this kind of falls into the semantics of our definition. So are we still like putting something of value up at risk, engaging in this? If chance is still there, and then if, of course, if there's some sort of reward or prize, all three of those things have to be present. Otherwise, it could be simulated betting or simulated gambling, but not necessarily gambling by itself.
Yeah.
And yeah,
Well,
I think,
oh,
yeah,
you go.
go
Sorry,
ahead.
continue. I can answer that question a little bit, but you can go ahead first, Aaron.
Yeah, so Andrew was talking about those games that are centered around managing sports.
Okay. So while you're just checking for other questions, when we're talking about like video games specifically, whether it's Football Manager or whether it's I know the big one is EAFC, or as it was previously known as FIFA. Um, we once again we have a whole other presentation that talks about video game specific gambling, and we have a whole section within that presentation talking about Ultimate Team game modes where people are opening packs and getting cards, and if they're spending real money on it, absolutely it meets those definitions. So um, once again, you really have to look for those three criteria. If you're spending something of value, um, typically talking about money specifically, not so much about your time, even though your time is valuable. And then if there's chance involved in it, and if there's something you're winning out of it, if there's some kind of prize, those are the three things you can just ask yourself if you're not sure. But if Football Manager functions the same way as EAFC does, I would say it definitely meets that criteria, and wouldn't be a daily fantasy sport, but it would still count as a form of gambling. But good question. Thank you.
Yeah, that was a great question. And just to go back to the original question, everybody that did comment on that, they were saying that it is chance. And just for a clarification point, Christina asked, well, how do they determine the winners in fantasy sports? Could you explain that a little bit?
Yeah, that's another great question. I guess if you're not in it, then you don't necessarily know. Um, a lot of leagues decide to do. They have different kind of different like stats that they keep track of, and some will customize this. My experience is with fantasy hockey, so I apologize if you don't know hockey that well, but there are tons of different categories. So you have goals, and you'll have assists, and what they call a plus minus. Shots on goal, face-off wins. You have your goaltending stats as well, and the format that I played in was called head-to-head, where you'd be facing off against another team, and whoever's team would score the most goals would get a point for their team that week. And then whoever's team would score the most assists, they would get a point as well. And so basically whoever would win the most categories in that week would win that week, and they would get points in the standings based off of how well they did. Now, there are some other versions where it's like if you get a goal, it's worth 3 points. And so even if you got seven, you got 5 goals, but then the other guy got 19 assists, and assists are worth less, but they'll still have a net larger amount of points. That's a whole other system I don't have much experience with, but there are a variety of different ways. Basically, the way I know it is you go head to head, and whoever wins the most categories will win from week to week. And daily fantasy would just be an accelerated format of one of those two forms. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, I'm sorry if I could add on to that. So Christina said thank you. And then just to re-clarify, so it runs on some sort of algorithm with known stats of the team. Yes, although I do know of some people who play like on their own, just in an Excel spreadsheet, and it is based on player performance in your fantasy team. And so if they get a goal, you add a point, that kind of thing. So a lot of the well-known ones, it is an algorithm based on the player stats, and then like the the like backcountry ones is just based on what we catch when we're watching. And then Ramona said, "Are the points worth anything or just bragging rights?" If you're playing a daily fantasy sports, like in most competitive ones, there's an entry fee, but then also there is a prize. So in the fantasy leagues, it's at the end of the season. In the daily fantasy sports, depending on how they run it, if it's a daily one or a weekly one, I think some are even bi-weekly, there would be different prizes for those who get or generate the most points by the end of their like trading deadline is what they would call it. So by the end of the day, if that's their trading deadline, or by the end of the week. And those prizes will vary based on the league. Sometimes it's a lot of money. So a little more than bragging rights in
I think
some cases.
the most I ever paid into a league was only about $20. And there were 11 other people, and so all of that money just went towards like the person who won would get a part of that pool, and then the rest of the money would go towards like buying pizza and hanging out for the night. But I remember consistently running into these guys at these two gentlemen at my previous job who they were big into fantasy American football, and I think they said the one week they won $15,000 or something because of how well they did. So yeah, if it's just for fun, the points are just bragging rights. But at the end of the day, it's like the points in uh, if we looked at the Olympics, for example, how if you get a win, you get 3 points. If you get in football, at least, if you get a win, you get 3 points. If you get a loss, you get nothing. If you get a draw, then it's 1 point, and whoever has the most points would advance to the final or like to the next round. So it's kind of that same idea, and then when you get to the playoffs, it's elimination, um, similar to the Olympics. So I hope that clarifies it. But very good questions. I think just for the sake of time, we are going to keep moving, Aaron, unless okay, I'm going to keep moving. So just to round out this section, people that engage with daily fantasy sports specifically, once again, they have an increased likelihood of developing gambling problems, similar to the reasons we talked about with in-play betting and single event bets, and the fact that they're more frequent, and there are more opportunities to gamble, and all the reasons that you guys mentioned in the chat as well. These things all apply very similarly to daily fantasy sports. All right, time to take our second tiny little detour. We're going to talk about esports betting very briefly as well. There are a lot of similarities with regular sports betting, so a lot of what or we've been talking about as well will carry over to this concept. But esports betting is actually, let me back up a second. If you're not familiar with the term esports is just competitive video gaming. So for me, the game I always think of is Super Smash Brothers. I grew up playing the one for the GameCube, Super Smash Brothers Melee, and there's one for the Nintendo Switch currently as well called Super Smash Brothers Ultimate. And people will enter tournaments and they will fight against each other one-on-one or sometimes in team battles. And essentially in a knockout bracket, whoever wins the tournament will get some kind of large prize. Now, esports betting is people placing bets on the outcome of those competitive video game matches. So if I'm, if we're talking about Super Smash Brothers again, if I'm a real huge fan of a player named Mango, who that is what he goes by, that's not a made up name. If I'm a fan of Mango, I could put down 5 or 10 or 20 or $100 and say, oh, he's going to win this next match, or maybe he's going to win the entire tournament. And, if I guess correctly, then fantastic, I'll win some money. If not, then obviously the money I put forward will be lost. And so, with that in mind, why do we think that the people who bet on esports might not only be at risk of developing a gambling problem, but also developing problems with gaming specifically? Bit of a question, maybe a little bit out of left field. And while you guys are writing, so the games that are underneath there, Dota 2, Counter-Strike, and League of Legends, despite their age, continue to be some of the most popular esports games, both for generating revenue and for their prize pools, as well as viewership on online streaming services such as Twitch or Kick. So just an explanation there as well. But do we have any comments here yet, Aaron?
Yeah. Andrew also loves mango. But from
Yeah.
Victoria, they said since esports betting is still gambling, people could segue into other forms of gambling, which could become problematic. Also, often kids and teens will play video games, which could become problematic if they're combining that with betting. Christina said they know a lot of people who would really struggle on putting any limits on gaming related time. So they spend up to 10 hours a day watching gamers. Nicole says the intersection of gambling and gaming is so concerning, with gambling elements in video games and now video gaming elements in gambling. It's easy to treat gambling like a video game and vice versa. That's a really important point.
Yeah, that's good.
And somebody else said that they might like to play the same time that they're betting or play the same games that they're betting on. So lots of really good answers coming here and explanations, thoughtful
Yeah.
answers.
Yeah, excellent explanations. And I'm sure the ones we have on screen were touched on, but just I can't see all the answers as they're coming in, unfortunately. But yeah, one person mentioned that people who do esports betting might be likely to migrate to other forms of gambling, and there is a lot of research that actually shows that the two that they do actually influence each other, as you mentioned. One thing that can also be risky is that professional esports players are also at a higher risk of developing a problem with gambling. Not necessarily gaming, because technically it is their job at that point, but oftentimes in the same way that those who work at a casino, who might work as a dealer at a casino, or who have some kind of role on the floor, as much as the statistics say that that those people are more likely to develop a gambling problem, professional esports players, because they're surrounded by the betting atmosphere as well, the same kind of risk applies in this case. I know it's a little bit different, but it is a similar scenario in that case. And then the last point as well, the amount of time that people are spending watching, absolutely, they influence this. Now, within esports, there are two main types of currencies, and not just two currencies in general, just two different types. And the first thing is, of course, your money, right? You can maybe not put in cash unless they have betting in person, but you can put forth your credit card or use something like cryptocurrency to make bets on the outcome. And there are a lot of online websites. Some of them might not be as regulated, but that's what we know as gambling. But then there's something else that is a little unorthodox that we're not used to, and it is betting what they call skins, or if we want to use the proper term, it would be cosmetic items. And not every game offers this opportunity, but some of the bigger ones like Dota 2 and Counter-Strike, they both do. And so on the screen, you can see there are three different items, both at very different very different price ranges. You can see in the bottom right here, let me turn on my laser pointer real quick. You can see in the bottom right here, we have a cosmetic item going for only $42 Canadian, whereas on the left, we have about another item going for $300 Canadian. And then up here in a completely different game, there's a set of gloves that is going for over $1,100 Canadian. And in one of our other presentations as well, there's another set of gloves that was going for almost $7,000. And none of these items actually affect how the game works. It doesn't make you a better player. It doesn't make you do more damage or anything. They just change how your character looks. And yet they have these inherent values, and people can risk these kinds of items on the outcome. Rather than saying, I want to put $100 forth, they might say, well, I'm going to bet my Claws of the Blood Moon on, the outcome of this match. And if, so and so wins, then I'll keep that and I'll win extra money or win another cosmetic item. And uh, it's just a very, very different form of betting that we don't really see in other forms of betting or sports betting, but something it's very unique to esports betting specifically. Now, before we move on from this, we just want to talk a little bit about the risks and the safety tips that we have for this. So, the first thing is that anytime somebody is unlocking a loot box or opening some kind of crate, some kind of randomized opportunity to get these kinds of items, it can potentially be harmful to people's well-being. And so we really encourage people to learn about the risks of gambling and try to set those time and money limits and engage in other activities that you enjoy. And I know I say this in a lot of my presentations. I know it's so easy for us to just, sit here and say that. I know it's much easier said than done. But the reality is if even if we have people that come beside us to help us out with that, it can help reduce those negative effects pretty significantly. And then some of the other risks that are involved with esports betting specifically is that, as I alluded to earlier, there really is a lack of oversight. There's no governing body when it comes to esports specifically. But it also has the same risks as match fixing, and sometimes there could just be the exposure to inappropriate content or behaviors. And so we once again encourage you to stay safe online. Now, I believe we discussed, Aaron, that if you can't scan that QR code right now, I believe that this information will be sent out afterwards as well. So if you can't get it right now, that's okay. You will still get it eventually. Um,
Yeah, I believe that is true. Just like a quick thing, I know that for some people, I've been getting comments directly to me, that for some people it's freezing a little. If that does happen and it doesn't resume to normal, part of the reason we are recording it, given the amount of people that are in the webinar, it can cause some issues for your own connectivity. If you have those problems, you can contact us after and we can try and make the recording available to you. As another add-on, there was a comment from Andrew, I believe, talking about a third category when it comes to video games. Rather than currency and skins, there was also um, in-game upgrades as another way that people can use them to bet and get those prizes,
yeah,
which I thought was
absolutely.
very interesting.
Yeah, Andrew knows his stuff. All right, just looking at the time, I am going to keep moving. I want to make sure we can get through this presentation and not keep you all hostage here today. So, all right, so next our next topic is talking about ads, advertisements specifically, and exposure to sports betting. And for those of you, once again, here in Ontario, a lot of this will probably seem very familiar, but just some context for those of you who are not. As of April 2022, there were some changes in the legislature, and private companies were allowed to advertise for their websites. That's a very, very simple explanation of what changed, but it has been a hot topic here in Ontario for the past couple of years. So, first question, just to put it out there very briefly, where are we seeing sports betting ads? And I'm sure you're going to get some answers in the chat in a moment, Aaron, but once again, for the sake of time, I'm just going to quickly mention things. We talked about earlier how, I mean, we see them on TV typically, but within Canada at least, or within hockey or basketball, we'll see them on the boards around the arena. We'll see them during even just not even commercial breaks, but just in between little breaks where a team might have a timeout. Those are just a couple examples. Um, Aaron, do we have any good answers there? Oh, I think Aaron is freezing for me, unfortunately. So I don't know if
Sorry, can you hear me?
I can hear you now. Yes.
Okay, so there were lots of answers. So what TV, Facebook, Spotify, Uber Eats, YouTube, different social media platforms, sports broadcasts, Vivid Tickets or StubHub, Ticketmaster, um, billboards in restaurants, billboards on the side of the road, different things like that.
Yeah.
Um, lots of different places.
Yeah. And I think regardless of whether you're here in Ontario or elsewhere, I think we can all agree that our lives are kind of inundated with advertisements, regardless of what they are. Now, I think this might be our last poll today, but how often do you think you see a gambling advertisement in a live sports match? And once again, this might differ from place to place. This statistic specifically is from CBC's Marketplace, so this is in Canada. But I'm very interested to see what people think. It's really fun when the answers are coming in too. Like I can see as like the bars are moving. It's really entertaining for me. I don't know about you, Aaron, but
It's definitely interesting. Like our practice sessions, there was only 3 of us, so it's nice to see it live.
yeah,
And we're really all over the board on this one. With our last couple polls, there's been some pretty standout answers on this one. However, we're pretty split.
yeah,
So we've slowed down. So I'm going to end the poll here. I'm sorry if you weren't able to answer. And you can see that every 20 seconds was 17% of our audience. Every minute was 31. Every 3 minutes was 30. And every 7 minutes was 22. So we're very not evenly split, but close to it with the results that we can see.
yeah. And there is your answer for the question today. So it's actually approximately every 20 seconds. Now, I think that's absolutely insane. I know there's another stat that we quote in one of our other presentations that says on average people see about 4,000 advertisements in a day, and obviously this can be affected by where you live and what your lifestyle is, but um, every 20 seconds is pretty outstanding in my opinion.
Yeah. If I can add with this one too, it's especially interesting. It's specifically for when you're watching on TV, but it's not like it's a new ad every 20 seconds. It's just any time that one of those ads pop up on the screen.
Yeah.
Um, and it's still alarming every 20 seconds.
Yeah, it's still you're spending how long watching a game, you're spending how long watching advertisements as well. Like we're good at blocking it out, but it's still quite alarming. So now,
Um,
oh, sorry, go ahead, Aaron.
Sorry, Christina just submitted a question. What's the difference here between advertisement and conditioning? Because they show the addictive content, noise, symbols of reward in the content. Um,
I I think you very well could argue that it is conditioning. That's a really good point. Um,
yeah. Sometimes, though, with the different advertisements specifically from this research, the ads aren't always like commercials. Sometimes they're just like on the billboards of on not on the billboards, on the hockey boards in an arena, they'll like use digital pasting kind of to show it. It's just the logo that shows up or like one of their like slogans kind of thing. However, some of the other ads, they do show the noises and symbols and the different things that have been associated with that kind of conditioning. But yeah, it's a good comment, good
yeah,
question. I'm not
very good.
really sure. I feel like that could be like like its
It,
own
so,
essay.
yeah, something for us to look into maybe in the future. That's a very good point. Thank you very much. All right. Once again, for the sake of time, I'm going to keep moving. I'm notorious for this. I apologize. But okay, so do we think that ads make people in general want to gamble? And the research does show that, um, or at least according to research, that advertisements are about 4 times more appealing when it comes to appealing to 11 to 24-year-olds when compared to adults over the age of 25. And that gambling has been, gambling advertisement excuse me, gambling advertising is significantly associated with the likelihood of a child developing a gambling problem or just gambling in general in the future. When you expose them when they're young it absolutely does have an effect. Now, when we're engaging with sports betting media, whether it's advertisements or in a moment we'll talk about people that are trying to recommend different services. Sometimes, whoops, a little too far. Sometimes it can be tricky to recognize if a gambling advertisement is actually an ad, especially when we're talking about things like being on Instagram, when we're talking about influencers. I'm sure a lot of us have been very conditioned in this case that when you see an ad, you can feel it. Like the way it starts, it's an advertisement right away. But sometimes it can still it can fly past our radars and we're not really aware of it. So, but it's important to ask things like, what are they not telling you? And once again, reminding yourself that you don't always have complete control over a match. Now, we're just going to talk about some common themes and look at some advertisement examples. I don't have one on screen yet. Don't worry about it. That will be fixed in a moment. But there are some pretty consistent themes, and it's that gambling is fun and risk-free. It's accessible. It's oftentimes they use things like humor to make it more appealing. For everyone who's not in Canada or the UK, I apologize for the misspelling of humor. Oftentimes they try to appeal to your team loyalty, your sense of community, and oftentimes they use celebrities as well. So here come our very Canadian ads, but here's the first example. And I think we can see some of these themes pretty apparently here. That number 4, the team loyalty one, is absolutely there. If you are not aware, BMO Field is located in Toronto and is where the Toronto FC, the Toronto Football Club, plays their games. And here you can see an advertisement for the Toronto Maple Leafs as well. But really trying to use people from the team. That's John Tavares, who is the captain. So we're using a celebrity to endorse, and we're really using that team loyalty to appeal to people here. Next, we have another one from BetMGM. I mentioned this one a little while ago, but there's Wayne Gretzky, who's one of the greatest hockey players of all time. And it's really trying to, use this idea of accessibility, right? You don't have to fly all the way to Las Vegas. Now you can just do it on your phone. It's here in Ontario now. And between the celebrity endorsement and the accessibility, we can see at least a couple of those themes there fairly easily. Finally, we have another one. This is another advertisement just outside of the exhibition place, which you can kind of see the BMO Field actually in the back there on the right. And we see that gambling, once again, is fun and risk-free. They try to use a little bit of humor there. I kind of got a chuckle out of this the first time I saw it. Bet on the sports you love and some that you like. But it's once again, it's using those very common themes to really appeal to people. There is one other one that a video that we typically share with this presentation, but we had some issues with the audio earlier in that it wasn't transferring over. So unfortunately, I can't show that one today, but we'll include that in the follow-up email after we're finished with the presentation. Now, there's another form of marketing as well that at least in my experience, I've seen all over the place, and it's the uses of bonuses. And in case you didn't know with bonuses, I know for myself, when I first saw these, I thought it was just free money, and I'm sure a lot of people do. But you got to make sure to read those terms and conditions because oftentimes you have to bet a certain amount first before you get that bonus. So it's not just like they're giving you $1,000 and you can put it forward. You're going to have to put some of your money forward first. So the company is guaranteed to make money anyway, and then they'll give you some of that money as well. So probably the most obvious one to me is that Bet365 one in the top right, where it says, you bet $10, you get $50 in bonus bets, right? If you don't bet $10, you're not getting that $50, even if you sign up for Bet365. So just an important distinction to be aware of. Now, once again, I alluded to this a little bit earlier, but oftentimes partnership is used as another form of marketing. I'm sure we've all seen sports broadcasters or sports betting operators advertising. We talked about this at length earlier. And I know it's even here in Canada, it's actually starting to become more commonplace here where companies like sports betting companies will actually be allowed to put the logos on the jersey or on their equipment, on their helmets, for examples. But it's just another form of marketing, and we just like to highlight that as well. Now, with social media, once again, I alluded to this earlier, but it's important to be aware of people that we like to use the term tipsters, people that try to really influence people to try a product or try a brand. And it's important to know that sometimes, or most of the time, they're going to be getting financially compensated, and they don't always have to disclose it in some cases. In Canada, or in a lot of platforms, it's supposed to be mandatory that they disclose it, but that will not always be the case. There are always people that are going to try and get around, what the guidelines might be, or find loopholes. Oftentimes, they try to give the impression that they're helping fans, whereas the reality is, once again, we're just emphasizing that perceived control that we might have. And then they oftentimes try to use subtle promotions, such as like sports betting, or sorry, sorry, not such as sports betting, such as jokes or memes. Like they try to seem relatable. A lot of research has found that people who are influencers, um, or rather people are more likely to try a product if it's advertised by an influencer than if it's advertised by the company itself. And so by seeming relatable, it can really generate this feeling of a parasocial relationship where you're more likely to believe them and try the product they advertise. Um, and yeah, I'm not going to touch too much on that bottom part. Do we have any comments or questions just as we're wrapping up here, Aaron?
We did have some comments in just talking about, whoa, uh, many stockbroker platforms use tipsters too, which is an interesting relation because a lot of tipsters on sports betting try to convince people that sports betting is just the same as investing in the stock market, which isn't true. Um, and also streamers who open loot boxes on stream, same kind of thing. Like
Yeah.
they have some sort of special insight that gives people control, when in actuality that's not true.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I actually, at my previous job, one of my coworkers' boyfriends was sponsored by like an online casino, and that was the first time I realized that when they're doing a lot of the streaming and stuff online, they're usually getting like the money that they're gambling isn't even their own money. They're getting it from the company, and then if they win stuff, then they get to keep it. But um, really, it's another form of advertisement. So absolutely. All right, so just as we're wrapping up, we're going to talk a little bit about sports betting and mental health. And I know, Aaron, you have something that you wanted to add here, but I'll start off and then I'll pass it over to you. Um, I think we were talking about substances a little bit. But with gambling, it can be a little bit tricky. Um, and I love the graphic. It's so simple at the bottom, but I really love that graphic at the bottom where um, oftentimes like problem gambling can, if somebody has a problem with gambling, it can lead to a lot of anxiety and depression, whether it's them, loathing the fact that they are too deep into the activity, or whether it's them just feeling anxious because they want to get back to it because they really enjoy it. And unfortunately, those negative feelings can sometimes lead to people continuing to gamble as a way to cope with those feelings, as a way to moderate those negative feelings that they're experiencing. And so it can create this kind of perpetual loop, which very unfortunately can lead to greater problems as well. But Aaron, I'll turn it over to you for a second.
Yeah, so thank you, Adam. One of the other areas, like we have a bit more on it, but we don't really have the time left for today. So I'm just going to touch upon it quickly. And that's kind of mixing different things that people can get a dependency for, especially things that can influence how we're thinking. And that's basically just consuming other things such as alcohol or cannabis. When it comes to sporting events, these are super popular things to engage in. That's true as well of the fact that most hosts of sporting events or arenas or diamonds, whatever it is, they usually serve alcohol on a professional level. Like if it's something that the audience or the public can come out and pay and see, there's usually alcohol available. Now, also in Ontario, cannabis is obviously legal here. You can't smoke it inside, but that doesn't mean that people aren't doing it. So we're mixing substances with alcohol, cannabis, but also caffeine is another one that can affect our thinking process. And then we're mixing all of those in with gambling as well, which involves our finances. Um, So there are higher risks of you know, in experiencing problem gambling, but also dependencies on other substances as well, especially when we mix it. You might say it's a bad cocktail. Um,
Uh,
but it's just something to keep in mind. So if you are going to go to a sporting event and you like energy drinks, you like maybe to have a drink here or there, or like cannabis and you want to gamble, either deciding not to mix those because it's a bad cocktail or really planning ahead of time to make sure that your harm reductions are in place, ready for you to fall back on if you're going to gamble, but also harm reductions for any of the other activities you might engage in as well. Just something to keep an eye on. And I wish we had more time to talk about it because it is important, but unfortunately, we're really reaching the end of our
yeah,
workshop.
yeah.
Back to you, Adam.
Perfect. Thanks, Aaron. So speaking of harm reduction, guess what? We're going to talk about harm reduction. Um, we'll probably wrap up in the next 5 minutes or so, and then we should have some time for any extra questions if you have them. Um, but the first thing we want to highlight is something that is called the lower risk gambling guidelines, and there are three main things that you can kind of keep in mind to reduce the likelihood of developing a gambling addiction or the risks, the risk factors, I guess. So the first thing is there's a guideline as to how much money you should be spending. And at least here in Ontario, what we recommend is no more than 1% of your household income before tax per month. And so there's a nice little chart that was put together as well that kind of gives you an idea of how much money you should be spending. So maybe you can see where your own income is there and kind of guesstimate where your maximum monthly amount would be. But that's the first thing that they recommend. Secondly, they recommend for how frequently you should gamble, it should be no more than 4 days per month. Um, so even if that 1% of your income is, $100, if you make $120,000, you're still going to have to split that down to 4 days a month. Or if you're going to gamble all 100 in one day, that should be it. So kind of setting your time and money limits in conjunction with each other rather than separate from each other. And then finally, they also recommend to limit the amount of games that you actually play. So they recommend no more than 2 games at a time, and not like you're playing poker with one hand and sports betting with your other. They're trying to say like if those are the 2 games you play, don't pick up another one because that'll just increase the likelihood of those risk factors being much more, excuse me, problematic. Another thing we want to highlight, at least here in Ontario, is the Ontario iGaming logo. And they're responsible for regulating every single form of online gambling here in the province. So if you're going to be gambling through an iGaming regulated site, there are some really great benefits, including the fact that it's transparent. Your winnings are going to be paid out accurately and in a timely manner, and all of your information is kept secure and private. Whereas when you gamble through websites or applications that are not regulated by iGaming Ontario, they may not be forced to have the same level of transparency. The payouts might be delayed or inaccurate, and then finally, your personal information can also be at risk. Finally, I know there's a lot of information on screen. I'm not going to read everything. I don't expect you to read everything either. But just some questions to ask yourself if you're not sure if gambling might be a hobby or a problem for yourself. A couple that we really like to highlight. I really like that center one. I'll grab my laser pointer again. This guy right here, the have you spent more time or money than you intended? I think that's a really important question to ask yourself. And just speaking from personal experience very quickly, I was engaged. I used to play Ultimate Team on NHL. Once again, I'm a Canadian. I can't help myself, apparently. But yeah, I used to play Ultimate Team back in 2017, which is that game mode where you can open up card packs, and the players that you get out of these packs, you can make a team out of in the video game to play against other people. And initially, I said to myself, I'll spend $40, right? That's all I'm going to spend. And by the end of the year, that $40 turned into what I thought was $400 or $500. And even at that point, I was like, yeah, I was saving up for university at that point too, and I was kicking myself and just really frustrated with myself. And now years later, when I got this job last year in January, I decided to find out how much I had actually spent. And so I went and I looked at every single transaction I made in NHL 17, and that $400 or $500 was just over $1,300. So speaking from personal experience, that one really rings true with me. I knew it was a problem, and thankfully I was able to stop it at that point. But yeah, just an example. There are so many other indicators as to whether it could be a problem more than just a hobby. All right, a couple more things we want to just really quick run through as well. There's an organization called BetBlocker, and they have a free service that allows you that manages how much access you actually have to gambling websites. So BetBlocker, we have it as a question. Once again, for the sake of time, I'm just going to show you the answer. Currently, they block over 84,000 sites, and they have 1,500 apps that they currently block as of July 2024. So this is very recent information. And if gambling is a problem for you or someone you know, BetBlocker can really help you set those limitations, so you're not you're not experiencing that kind of pitfall. And then finally, just a couple other things we want to highlight very quickly. We have some other resources here as well. These are all Ontario specific, so a lot of them are Ontario specific, I should say. But the Kids Help Phone and the Good to Talk help phones are both anonymous helplines. I believe all of this information will be sent out as well afterwards, but we also typically talk about the CMHA, and then we also highlight Connects Ontario on the right there. I really like to say this as, if you don't know where to look first, check Connects Ontario, because they will show you what is available in your region before they send you off to Toronto or Ottawa or something, if that's tricky for you to do. Okay, finally, we have a couple other just ways to stay safe. This is our last slide. Thank you all for sticking with us this whole way so far. But some other just very basic, just general gambling safety tips. We encourage you to plan ahead and set those limits, as we talked about, to view sports betting as a form of entertainment and not as a potential source of income. It's important to remember that there's no way to predict the outcome. Remember that it is still chance, even if you think your knowledge of the stats might influence your ability to be correct. It's never a guarantee. And then, as Aaron talked about earlier as well, make sure to avoid mixing substances with gambling, because that can cause some other issues as well. Yeah, and that is everything from us today. So thank you all so much for attending, for your participation today. Just before we move on to questions, there is an evaluation. Aaron, I don't know if we're sending it out in the chat now, or Yvette, if we're sending it out afterwards.
It'll be sent in afterwards.
Okay.
And just as another add-on for those who would like the recording, I can share the email again. You can send the request to our supervisor, Yvette, our manager, Yvette, and here's the email right now going to the chat. However, we can't share the slide deck itself, just the recording. And thank you so much for everybody who attended. If you do have any last minute questions, now is the time to ask.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's nice to actually be able to see the chat, though, I will say. I see what you mean about how quickly it moves now, too. It just skips along.
It moves quickly. It's like, have you ever been in like when you're gaming and they have those large chats, or like Twitch streams?
Yeah.
This is
man.
what this felt like.
Oh, yeah, Andrew, now that I see your name, I do actually remember
Mango
you
Nation.
I remember you from that previous one. Thank you so much for joining us again. I hope you enjoyed. And yeah, Mango Nation. Yeah, that's awesome.
Well,
Thank you.
great job, both of you. It was very busy in the beginning with that chat, but well done.
Thank you, Yvette.
We'll just wait for everybody
Yep.
to leave. Yes, I do believe that Lucia is going to put the recording onto YouTube, and then we will share that link with people that want to watch it, and then, yeah, we can take it from there.
Perfect. All right. Yeah, sorry about the YouTube link not working for the one section, but
Yeah, the recordings are always such a stress. They're great to have, but it's just sometimes such a stress, especially when there's a lot happening.
Yeah. Awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you to everybody. As you are all leaving, we'll probably close the webinar now, and then we'll chat later in the team meeting. Thanks, everybody.
All right.
Thank you, everyone. Have
Take
a
care,
great
everyone.
day.
Bye.